They say the best revenge is living well, but I'll let you in on a little secret. The real best revenge is sitting quietly in the back row of a crowded room, watching your enemies build a glass castle on a foundation you already dug out from under them. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. The thing about being an old-school civil engineer is that people think you only understand things that can be mixed in a cement truck or measured with a steel tape. They look at your calloused thumbs, the permanent line of Georgia red clay ground into the seams of your boots, and they form an immediate, comfortable picture of who you are. They think your mind moves at the speed of pouring concrete, slow, heavy, and easily contained by a wooden frame. My name is Thomas Vance. I'm 65 years old. I drive a dented 2011 Ford F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a tailgate that rattles like a box of nails every time I hit a pothole on the back roads outside Athens, Georgia. I live in a modest brick ranch house that I built with my own hands in 1989, surrounded by 5 acres of pecan trees that require more pruning than they're worth. If you saw me sitting on a plastic bucket in my driveway on a Tuesday morning, power washing an old iron engine block in a faded denim shirt, you'd probably offer to help me carry my groceries. You wouldn't think to ask for my financial ledger. For 34 years, I ran Vance Infrastructure Group. We didn't build high-rises or flashy glass boutique hotels that get featured in architectural magazines. We built water treatment plants, highway retaining walls, underground culverts, and the deep, invisible subterranean systems that keep municipal counties from sliding into the river every time a hurricane comes up the coast. It's dirty, unglamorous work, but it has one major advantage. Nobody looks closely at the man who owns the dirt. 3 years ago, when the knees started talking back to me in the winter mornings, I quietly sold the operating assets of the company to a private equity firm out of Atlanta for a number that would make your coffee go cold if I said it out loud. I kept the real estate holding company, Vance Land Trust, and I kept my mouth shut. I didn't buy a house in Palm Beach. I didn't buy a boat with 3 outboard motors. I bought 4 more tons of gravel for my driveway and went back to my pecan trees. My oldest boy, Marcus, did not inherit my affection for the quiet places. Marcus is sharp, handsome, and spent 4 years at Vanderbilt learning how to use words like synergistic optimization and capital allocation without breaking a sweat. When he married Victoria Sterling 2 years ago, I showed up to the wedding in my only good charcoal suit, shook her father's hand, and immediately recognized the type. Victoria's family owned Sterling Realty Group, a high-end residential development firm that had spent 30 years slapping gold leaf and crown molding on cheaply framed McMansions north of Atlanta. Her father, Julian Sterling, was a man whose teeth were too white, whose hair was too silver, and whose handshake was always a little too firm, like he was trying to convince you he wasn't about to check your coat pockets while you weren't looking. At the rehearsal dinner, Victoria's mother looked at my boots, quietly adjusted her pearl necklace, and spent the evening talking to a county commissioner about their summer house in Hilton Head. I didn't care. I've been underestimated by smarter people than the Sterlings before breakfast. The trouble began 9 months ago, when Julian Sterling's empire encountered a variable it hadn't budgeted for. The commercial credit markets tightened, and a major mixed-use development project they were building near Oconee County found itself short on bridge financing. Marcus came out to the house on a Sunday afternoon. He sat at my kitchen table, looking at the faded linoleum and the old copper kettle on the stove, and he laid out a prospectus with the frantic, sweaty energy of a man who has been handed a script he didn't write. "Dad," Marcus said, leaning in so close I could smell the expensive cologne Victoria had bought him for his birthday. "It's a secured short-term note. Julian needs $800,000 to clear the municipal infrastructure lien so the primary construction loan can vest. He's willing to offer 10% interest backed by a secondary position on the land title itself. It's family, Dad. If this project stalls, it hurts my position in the firm. It hurts Victoria. I sat there for a long time, peeling a peach with my old pocket knife, letting the silence stretch until Marcus started shifting his weight in his chair. I asked him one question. Have you looked at the Oconee County Surveyor's topographic maps for the eastern boundary of that development? Marcus chuckled, that quick, slightly patronizing laugh he'd picked up in Atlanta. Dad, this is a $20 million development. We have civil engineering firms from Charlotte handling the grading. The maps are fine. The title is clean. We just need the liquidity. I didn't argue with him. You can't argue with a man who thinks a degree from Vanderbilt makes him immune to the laws of hydrology. I told him I would provide the $800,000. But I didn't wire it to Sterling Realty Group. I had my personal attorney, a man named Raymond Holt, who had spent 30 years defending municipal boards from crooked developers, structure the loan through a restrictive escrow clearing account. The terms were specific, hidden deep within 30 pages of standard boilerplate legal prose. The funds could only be drawn down once the Oconee County Engineering Office issued a certified Section 404 compliance voucher for the stormwater runoff system. Furthermore, the contract included an unconditional cross-collateralization clause. If Sterling Realty Group defaulted on the timeline by even 48 hours, or if the funds were used to service any debt outside the direct municipal infrastructure account, the loan didn't just default, the secondary position on the title automatically matured into a primary unencumbered ownership stake in the entire eastern commercial parcel, held by Vance Land Trust. I watched Julian Sterling sign the papers at a steakhouse in Buckhead a week later. He didn't read the 30 pages. Why would he? To him, I was just a retired dump truck contractor with a fat bank account and a son who wanted to impress his daughter. He signed his name with a gold Mont Blanc pen, tipped the waiter $50, and looked at me with an expression that was equal parts pity and victory. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. 6 months passed like water through a clean culvert. I didn't ask Marcus about the money, and he didn't bring it up. Then 2 weeks ago, an envelope arrived at my house. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. It was an invitation to the Sterling Realty Group Autumn Gala and VIP unveiling of the Oconee River Terrace. I called Marcus that evening to tell him I had received it. The line went quiet for 5 full seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, thin like a wire under tension. "Dad," he said, clearing his throat twice, "look, Victoria handled the invitations. It's institutional investors, regional bankers, city council members from 3 counties. Julian is pitching the Phase 2 luxury townhomes. It's a very formal, very specific corporate crowd. Victoria thought, she thought you might find it boring. You know how those things are. It's just people standing around in tuxedos talking about interest rates." "Boring," I said, looking down at my hands, at the gray grease under my fingernails that 48 hours of scrubbing never quite removes. "Marcus, your grandfather spent 40 years clearing the timber off the banks of that river so Julian's father could build his first office park. "I know, Dad, I know," Marcus said quickly, his voice dropping into a whisper. "But Julian is pitching a new credit line tonight. It's about appearance. It's about the brand. Please don't make it difficult." I didn't make it difficult. I told him to have a wonderful evening, hung up the phone, and went back to my kitchen. Then I went to my closet, took down a tailored navy blue wool suit I've owned for 4 years and have worn exactly twice, once to my wife's funeral and once to a state governor's dinner where they handed me an award for not letting a bridge collapse during the floods of 2015. I polished my good black leather shoes, the ones without the steel toes, and at 7:30 p.m. on Saturday night, I pulled my dented Ford F-150 right past the velvet ropes of the Oconee River Pavilion. The valet looked at my truck like it was an improvised explosive device. I handed him a crisp $100 bill, kept the keys in my pocket, and told him, "Park it right under the awning. I have a feeling I'm going to need to load some things into the bed before the night is over." Inside, the pavilion was a blinding display of cheap wealth made to look permanent. Crystal chandeliers hung from exposed pine rafters. Ice sculpture shaped like herons were melting slowly into silver trays, and a 4-piece string quartet was playing classical versions of pop songs that nobody was listening to. I saw Julian Sterling standing near the grand staircase, surrounded by 3 men in dark suits who carried the distinct look of mid-level bank executives who were deciding if they were about to lose their jobs. Victoria was beside him, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first dump truck, laughing at something a local judge was saying. Marcus was there too, holding a glass of champagne, looking around the room like a man who was terrified someone would notice he didn't belong there. When Victoria saw me walking across the polished marble floor in my navy blue suit, her smile didn't just slip, it vanished into her collarbone. "Thomas," Julian Sterling said, stepping away from the bankers with a look that was supposed to be a warm welcome, but looked more like a man facing a safety inspector during an unannounced audit. He didn't reach out to shake my hand. "Marcus didn't mention you were driving in from the country tonight. We're actually right in the middle of a private presentation for the Atlantic Capital Board." "Julian," I said, nodding to the bankers, "don't let me stop the performance. I actually came out because I wanted to see how that Section 404 drainage voucher looked in the final prospectus, the one your daughter filed with the county clerk on the 12th of last month." Victoria stepped between us, her champagne flute trembling slightly in her hand. "Thomas, really, this is a private corporate gala. Administrative paperwork isn't handled here. If you have questions about your loan interest, Marcus can email you the quarterly statement on Monday." I looked at my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were wide, bright, and completely devoid of any actual warmth. I looked at Marcus, who was staring at his shoes like they held the secrets to the universe. "The quarterly statement is fine, Victoria." I kept my voice at a level that didn't rise above the string quartet, but seemed to clear a 10-foot radius around our conversation. "The problem is the escrow drawdown your father executed 3 weeks ago. You submitted a certified engineering clearance from a firm called Piedmont Hydrology, stating the retention basins had been cleared for the Phase 1 build." Julian's silver eyebrows came together. "Piedmont is a licensed firm, Vance. Their signatures are on the title document." "Piedmont Hydrology is an LLC registered out of a UPS store box in Macon, Julian, and the sole officer listed on the charter is your brother-in-law, Douglas. Now let me tell you why that matters to a man who spends his life looking at dirt. I ran the municipal culvert layout for that entire river basin in 1994. The eastern parcel sits on an alluvial clay shelf. If you don't install a 3-tier retention system with concrete interceptors, the first 4-inch rainstorm will wash the foundation of those luxury townhomes right into the Oconee River. The 3 bank executives from Atlantic Capital had stopped looking at Julian's glossy prospectus. They were looking at me now. I had Raymond Holt pull the county registry records yesterday morning, I continued, leaning forward just enough so Julian could see the reflection of the chandeliers in my glasses. You didn't build the retention basins, Julian. You didn't even dig the trenches. You used the $800,000 from my escrow account to pay off the mechanics liens on your North Atlanta subdivision so the bank wouldn't foreclose on your corporate office. You filed a fraudulent environmental clearance under penalty of state perjury.
Marcus looked up then, his jaw slack, his eyes darting from his father to his father-in-law. "Julian, is that true? The infrastructure funding? We told the board it was cleared." Julian didn't answer him. His face had gone from silver-plated confidence to the gray color of cold slate. His jaw was working, his back teeth grinding together with a sound that I could hear over the violins. "This is an absurd escalation," Victoria rumbled, her voice cracking as she tried to maintain her boardroom composure in front of the Atlantic Capital executives. "You're threatening a lawsuit over a technical dispute. We can have our legal team clear this up in 48 hours. "There is no legal team clearing this up, Victoria," I said quietly, because the 48-hour default window under the cross-collateralization clause expired at midnight last night. Raymond Holt filed the primary deed transfer with the county clerk at 8 a.m. this morning. Vance Land Trust now owns the entire eastern parcel of the Oconee River Terrace, the parcel where your main utility lines, your access roads, and your parking structures are currently being constructed. I set my empty glass down on the edge of the ice sculpture. You didn't want a simple old contractor in a flannel shirt sitting at your table because of the optics, Julian. But you forgot that the man who understands the dirt is the only one who can tell you when your castle is about to sink. Atlantic Capital isn't vesting your loan on Monday because as of 9 o'clock this morning, they don't have a clean title to lean against. The 3 bank executives didn't say a word. They didn't yell. They didn't look at Julian. They just folded their leather folders, nodded to me out of professional respect, and walked out the front doors of the Pavilion into the October night. Marcus followed me out to the driveway. The gala was still going on inside, but the music sounded thin now, like a radio with a dying battery. He stood beside my Ford F-150 while the valet brought up a white Mercedes that belonged to someone who was probably going to be very unhappy by next Friday. "Dad," Marcus said, his hands in his pockets, his tuxedo jacket looking too big for him in the yellow parking lot lights. "How am I supposed to do now? The firm, if Julian defaults on the Atlantic loan, Sterling Realty goes under. I lose everything I put into it." I opened the door of my truck and climbed into the faded bench seat and looked down through the open window at my boy. "You didn't put anything into it but your pride, Marcus," I told him, starting the engine. The F-150 rumbled, the tailgate giving that familiar solid rattle that sounded better to me than any string quartet ever could. "You married into a name because you thought it made you look tall. Now you find out how much that name weighs when the foundation gives out. Come out to the house on Monday morning. I've got 40 acres of pecans that need harvesting, and I could use a man who isn't afraid to get his shoes dirty. If you're still looking for a shortcut after that, you can find your own way home." I pulled out of the driveway, the tires crunching over Julian Sterling's expensive gravel, and I drove back toward the pecan trees in the dark. Some men build empires out of ink and white teeth, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see the cracks. Thomas Vance builds his out of things that hold. There's a difference, and tonight, finally, everyone at the table understood it.